Again, we've understood the concept of an enterprise as a system. And so as change enablers, we need to apply the skill. We need to have the system thinking skills. And we need to apply the concept of system thinking when we are enabling changes, because we work within a system. We work with people that operate in specific areas of the system. And because they are only conversant with their part of the system, they might not be good system thinkers like us BAs. And so we need to coach them and help them to also come up to this level of system thinking whenever we are enabling changes. We must not be narrowed focus when working with stakeholders that are in specific area of the organization, because there are changes in their part of the enterprise would affect other areas of the enterprise. So we need to have that in mind. Oftentimes, we focus on the scope of change as it relates to a particular area, forgetting that the other organization, that the other parts of the enterprise as a systems with other components would require some adjustment, some modification to achieve equilibrium of that system. That's important. That's the reason why we need to system thinking. The enterprise is a system. We need to apply system thinking in solving solution, in recommending solution that addresses the needs of our stakeholders. The other reason I have here is we need to name it to tame it. Name it to tame it is an idea borrowed from the field of psychology. Psychologists help their clients to manage and overcome emotions and feelings by getting them to name it, to label it, so that they can know how to deal with it. Applying this concept again to enterprise change. If we can't fix a problem we don't even know. If we don't name it, we can't tame it. If we don't name all the changes, we can't manage them, we can't track them. So we need to be able to articulate and label various areas of the enterprise that will be impacted by a change. And so we can intentionally and deliberately apply actions that would successfully return the enterprise to equilibrium. Again, systems thinking. Now let's even look at this. Let's have I have this example to bring this home. You have a project sponsor, or it could even be you, the BA, talking to a group of stakeholders, and you tell them, oh, we are implementing a new CRM tool. That sounds very vague. The stakeholders might not be able to relate with what you are saying. Consider you provide more context by saying, we're implementing a new CRM tool, and it would have a medium to high impact to the sales and operations team as well as their processes. That begins to bring more clarity, more understanding to the team. They're understanding how they will be impacted, where the changes are going to be happening, and the degree of the changes too. And then you take it even further to be more specific on the capabilities, the people side, the process side, the technology side that will be impacted by the implementation of this new CRM tool. And then people are so clear, they know exactly what they need to start doing. They know the processes that needs to be reviewed. They know documents that needs to be updated. They know where to focus on their training needs analysis for their employees and all of that. So change impact assessment brings clarity to the changes we are also performing. Now let's look at how we perform change impact analysis. Change impact analysis is performed by understanding and clearly articulating the gap. The simplest technique we are very familiar with is gap analysis. So here you are comparing the current state to the future state from various perspectives. You are wearing different lenses and you are comparing the gap between the current state and the future state, and you are articulating it. All the perspective from process to customers to technology, the organizational culture, systems, policies. You are looking at it from all that perspective. And change impact assessment and analysis can be performed at the beginning of your project. It helps define what exactly would happen. It helps you identify all the activities and tasks to perform during the project. Again, it is not a once and for all activity. You continue to perform. It's an iterative process that can be performed throughout the life cycle of your project as more information becomes available. Now let's look at who performs, the roles that are responsible for performing the change impact analysis. The business analyst is not solely responsible for performing this change impact analysis. You need to be aware of that. However, the BA can start the process on their own, leveraging known and validated information and other organizational process assets to come up with a list that would drive further conversation with other stakeholders. Now, depending on the context of change, the next step may require identification of all the relevant stakeholders and inviting them for a workshop. It could also mean sending out surveys, depending on the technique that is suitable for the work you're doing. Facilitating this activity with a team of stakeholders using design thinking and interactive approach with tons of sticky notes and a conference room work can be a cathartic and engaging pursuit. You learn so much from that interactive approach. Now, let us look at the steps you can adopt for those that have not performed this before. I've also included a slide with steps you can adopt to perform this for your project or any initiative you are working on. So the first step I have here is prepare for change impact analysis. Again, you need to identify relevant stakeholders that have access to the right information. At this point, you want to make sure that the proposed solution is clearly defined and that everyone involved in the analysis is clearly briefed on the vision and the expected outcome. They know what the problem is and what the solution will look like. Then the next phase, of course, is for you to, before this happens, you need to take care of all the logistics, the meeting logistics, depending on the approach, your elicitation approach you want to use. You want to now brainstorm to identify all the affected areas of the enterprise. Different organizations would have different areas under focus depending on the project. It is worth spending a little time to get this top level brainstorming correct. This is still high level information you are gathering at this point. The next phase involves identifying impact. So you started in the previous phase, you identify all the areas, the part of the systems that is impacted by your change. Now you want to identify what are the exact impacts. So for each of the areas identified, you want to brainstorm the different elements to identify what could be impacted by your change. For example, if you are looking at departments, you may want to come up with the list of all the departments in the enterprise. If you are looking at process, you might want to map all the relevant associated process. The extent of your analysis depends on the criticality of your project and the time available. But just make sure you go as far enough as possible without getting bogged down with micro details. Don't go down the rabbit hole. The next step here would be to evaluate the impacts. Now you've identified the areas, the impact, you want to evaluate the impacts. Having listed all the groups of people, the processes, the technology, and everything that will be impacted to an appropriate level of detail, you want to walk through this list with your stakeholders to articulate clearly what needs to be changed or adjusted and the level of that impact. You could decide to estimate the level of effort, the cost, the riskiness of each of these items. After you evaluate impact, the next now is to manage the consequences. So this is where the rubber kind of meets the road. It's time for you to turn all the information you've gathered into action. For each of the impacts you identified in the previous phases, you want to assign roles and responsibility. You want to agree timeline. It is great to document all identified areas and impacts and provide this information to specific leaders in different areas so that they understand exactly the staff changes, the training needs, the process changes, and documents that might need to be updated. A sign-off is also great. It's also great to collect, obtain sign-offs from the respective leaders as they take responsibility for effecting those changes. This is also a good point where you can draw the list of your findings to the project sponsor, to the project manager to include in the project plan and also track for implementation as you progress along your work. Some techniques you would use for change impact analysis. I've mentioned some of them as in previous slides, but I would also talk more at this point. So elicitation is a great technique you would use, from document analysis to surveys, interviews, workshops, and focus group. Gap analysis is another very important technique I use when I perform change impact analysis. Risk analysis too, because I'm also trying to identify risk as I go along. And then it's useful for the project manager, or if I'm the one also in charge of the project. Process modeling and analysis is one great tool I use a whole lot. And I will show you how it helps me to identify the elements of the systems that will be changing in the next slide. If you look at this image I have depicted here, first of all, what I do is to map the process, right? Model the process using swimlane. Why? Because swimlane shows you more than a flowchart would do. So first, when I model the process using the swimlane diagram, I'm identifying all my roles, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders that might be impacted by that process. I already am able to identify the people. If I then take each of this task and activity in that process, I begin to ask more questions, and depending on my the questions I ask and my engagement with the stakeholders, I can begin to identify where the location where that process is happening, so that I know the scope of my change, the systems, the reporting line, the workflows, the organizational structure. Performing process analysis to my task and activity highlights the data, the reports, the interfaces. It even highlights my functional requirement, because if I'm building a software system, understanding the function of that process helps me begin to craft my functional requirements. So I call this process-led change impact analysis. And this is how I drive conversation with my stakeholders. They understand they might not understand the concept of process, but when you map the process and show them the sequence, how they perform their activities, they are able to relate with it. And then you taking it at the sub-process or activity level and asking them more questions, it highlights so many areas that might be impacted by the change. When I perform all of that, I usually group my findings into three. I call it process, people, and technology. I use this heading. I know it can actually be more, but I try to keep it simple by using this heading. And some of the things you begin to see when I under the people heading is roles and responsibilities. I'm identifying knowledge, skills, and competency impacts, reporting lines, job aids, training materials that needs to be prepared to bring people up to speed. I'm also identifying increase or decrease volume of work so we can make plans for FTEs. And at this point, I want to mention the fact that at the earlier stage of my project, I don't spend too much time to get into the micro details of the changes, depending on what my role is on that project. If I have an OCM specialist, I won't spend too much time doing the people side analysis of the change to understand the impact. I can list them and then hand that document over to the organizational change management specialist to continue the work. I only do drill down detailed analysis on the part of work that affects my deliverable. But I do highlight every potential area of impact, so that for enabling a holistic change, we are aware of what needs to be done. The BA doesn't have to be responsible for effecting all those changes. So bear that in mind. Under the process category, you will see stuff like changes to procedures, to processes, to business rules, data and information changes, decision and approval matrix. You could see regulatory, legal compliance requirements, product and services, contract and SLA might require some modifications too, privacy, data, information, and of course, accessibility requirements. Realize is becoming more and more prominent with all the government regulations around accessibility, health and safety requirements too. And under the technology headings, you would see stuff like all the hardware, the softwares, even the website, intranet. Depending on the nature of your project, you might need to update information on the intranet or even the external website. Some department or team might be using some end user computing like Microsoft Word templates, Excel macros. You don't want to ignore all of that. You want to understand what they use it for and how it can and what in the future state is taking care of that part of their work. You are looking at work tools. Do they need scanners in their new job role? Do they need fax machines? So you are looking holistically from that perspective also.